Nation in Conversation, proudly brought to you by AFGRI, Fort Knox, Hinterland, Monsanto, Nedbank, NWK and Sendes. The majority of men meet failure because their lack of persistence in creating new plans to take the place of those which fail. A good objective of leadership is to help those who are doing poorly to do well, and to help those who are doing well to do even better.
Good day and welcome to Nation in Conversation. I'm Theo Foster. At Nation in Conversation, we aim to create a better understanding of the agricultural industry and demonstrate how essential a healthy agriculture sector is to ensure food security and our continued existence. Today we're going to focus on primary food production, the challenges and the opportunities. You can follow us on Twitter at NationConverse or visit the website nationinconversation.co.za. Now, with me in the studio today is Tabi Nkosi, Senior Economist at Agri SA, and Dr. Mantlo Kalaba. He's the International Trade Economist at the University of Pretoria. Welcome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Tabi, the agriculture sector has changed quite a bit in the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. It's become a lot more commercial, a lot more intensive. If you look at the sector, what was the major drivers of these changes?
So the sector has changed quite substantially, and that's largely because farmers have to stay competitive. So nobody really changes unless there's a need to change. And what we've seen over the last 10 years is that farm sizes have become a lot bigger. Farmers need to take advantage of economies of scale so as to reduce their costs. So it's a lot cheaper to produce things in mass. So that has happened. But we've also seen a lot more mechanization. So tractors are becoming bigger, harvesters are becoming bigger, because really it's really about speed and it's about really maximizing your production. But we've also become more global as a market, and we have to respond to the needs of Europe and see what the world demands. So farmers are becoming a lot more in tune with what the world demands. So you're not just farming because you have the land and you want to farm, but you're really looking intelligently at what the market needs and what you need to sell to make a profit at the end of the day.
South African farmers compete with Farmers International, not just with the local farmers, but they also compete with the government supporting Farmers International. That has changed the landscape quite a bit.
It really has. And as Tabi has said, you have on one hand the demands at international level that you either have to keep up with in order to compete, or you have to only focus on the domestic market. But as you said, if you look back 20 years, 30 years, we have gone through a period where our farmers were heavily supported by government. That changed around mid-1990s. Now, the demands for the domestic market look different because the cost of production suddenly goes higher without government support. At the same time, products from foreign countries enter our market as we try to access theirs. So all those dynamics, they brought a new pattern and they required that these changes take place. So some were required, some were enforced on our sector.
If we look at those sectors where we export successfully and those where other people import into South Africa, sketch this landscape. What products would you put where?
Well, we do export a lot of horticultural products, apples, pears, citrus products, wines, and a lot of agro-processed products. But at the same time, those that we don't produce sufficiently, meaning where our production does not meet the local demand, are in the products such as wheat. We don't produce any rice commercially, so we import a lot of rice. And then we have sugar and some of the products which we do import during the season where we don't have sufficient production. But by and large, our export market or our exported products are mainly from the horticultural sector.
Tabi, if you take the changing environment, the fact that we have a free market, the fact that prices go up and down, the fact that inputs go up and down, the fact that we don't have any support from government in terms of subsidies or that we don't have the structures we used to have where it was a bit more simpler, that also results in another type of farmer and another set of skills. What is that about?
It really needs a more business-savvy farmer. Risk management is everything in agriculture. It's a very risky business. You don't know what prices are going to be. You are fully susceptible to the climate. So it really produces a farmer that is in touch with what is going on in the world, what is going on in terms of the climate. So that's really what has happened. Farmers have become a lot more adapted to what the environment is going to do. Farming is very resource-intensive. So you need to think about, what happens when there's a drought, what happens with energy prices if you're an irrigation farmer. So you really need to be on top of things. A lot of farmers are hedging the prices that they can obtain for their products on the market. So it really is a business, and normal business principles apply.
And you need to be a businessman
Yes.
that happens to specialize in primary agriculture.
Exactly. Just like if you're a businessman that has a pharmacy or a businessman that has a tuck shop, it really is the same principle. But I think, only now we're starting to realize that that needs to be in agriculture, because the family farm was what historically we used to be, but right now it's really commercial.
Yes, I wanted to add that what Tabi has actually mentioned that is important is that there are a lot of uncontrollable factors in agricultural business. So she mentioned the climate. There is the issue of biology. There is drought. So those are outside the control of a farmer or a human being. However, if you are in financial production or you are in finance, whether it's raining too much or there's no rain, you still operate as normal. So all those mean that now the farmer competing with the new and the international market, they need to adapt accordingly. They need to adjust the cost. As she said, they need to be very smart in doing so. Either becoming bigger, producing at a scale, or really finding a very good niche where it will be commercially sustainable.
Would you say that our commercial farmers are internationally competitive?
Absolutely. I think we have some of the best farmers in the world. Our farmers compete globally. We've seen a lot of international companies coming to invest in South African farms. So that really says something for our farms. But we also have farmers that are not so competitive. And that's the challenge in our industry, that we have your smaller emerging farmers that really do still need support. And we have your mega farmers who are producing on a massive scale and really dealing internationally. So I think we have both sides of the spectrum, but we have really great farmers, I think.
After the break, I want to talk about this opportunity, this yield gap between the commercial farmers and the new farmers, where there's ample opportunity to create better yields. We'll be back right after the break. Welcome back to Nation in Conversation. We're discussing primary food production, the opportunities and the challenges. Darby, just before the break, we noted that there's an opportunity in terms of yields. We have farmers that produce at the best yields in the world, and then we have new farmers that still need to close that yield gap. How are we going to address that?
Well, I think closing the yield gap is very important, because we have a growing population, people need more food. So it's crucial that we start thinking about that now. But essentially, how the bigger farmers have really managed to really attain the yields that they have is really taking advantage of biotechnology and really thinking about their farms, as we said, as a business, and really starting to look at where the opportunities are. So I think a lot of, we've seen a lot of adoption in terms of GMOs that have really allowed us, even though we've decreased our area size, but we've really been able to make substantial inroads in terms of yield. So I think greater adoption in terms of research, in terms of your biotechnology could really help the smaller farmers really get up to speed.
Matlo, how are we going to get more people into the commercial agriculture space?
Part of it goes to what Tabi has mentioned, that they need to come on board with government support to some extent. And government has provided some initiatives to encourage people to participate in agriculture. But in one area where the initiative can be very useful is with regards to providing the services advisory support, which has actually slowed down, or the numbers of the extension officers have come down. Remember, most of the new players, or what we call small scale farmers, by and large, their level of education is not that high. Their experience in agricultural participation is also not that long in terms of years in participation. So that gap in experience needs to be closed by having that advisory support. With that support, together with other financial support through Mafisa and other programs of the state, they can start producing better and increasing the yields. As you said, the gap between commercial yields compared to those of small farmers is quite big. In order to close that, it's about helping those who are at the bottom to move up closer to those who are producing commercially.
It is paramount to get them into the formal commercial structure, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Another risk facing farmers is climate change. We read about it, we hear about it, we see some of the events in the rest of the world. From an analyst point of view, looking as an economist to the sector, what are you seeing?
I mean, climate change is real. We have an El Nino event forecasted for the next season. And I think in the future, we're going to see more occurrences of drier conditions in agriculture. So I think we have to get better with our risk management. I think that we really need to increase our irrigation farming and really start to foresee these events a bit better. In the past, we've been very reactive. Things have caught us by surprise like they have in this season. And I think we need to be a lot more proactive in terms of what we do on climate because it's not going anywhere. And
it will remain a risk, and a risk that will need to be managed in some other way.
Absolutely, and we've seen a lot of countries really moving marginal land out of production, really starting to increase their irrigation, looking at where they have comparative advantage, and I think that is likely going to happen for South African farmers as well.
If you look at South African farmers and we read about the activities in the rest of Africa, is that an opportunity for our farmers?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. The rest of Africa is actually providing better opportunities. Secondly, because other competitors are not quite yet in the African continent. But South Africa, through a number of trade agreements, we have already made inroads. We have seen some of our retailers, majority of our retailers are present in many countries on the continent. So they have leapfrogged that process where now already there's a channel where our products can actually find those markets. But most importantly is the fact that many African countries are growing at a very high rate, which means that the presence of high incomes means that they can also access imported goods. And most of those goods would be coming from South Africa. And they are already present in those retailers that are present on the continent.
Would you say that opportunity also exists in South Africa in terms of urbanization?
Absolutely. I mean, already 60% of our population is urban, which really then leaves a very, very small group to produce, and farming is a rural activity. But as Matlo has already said, we not only have a responsibility as agriculture for South Africa, but we have the rest of the African continent to think about. In terms of maize production, we service the entire SADC region. So it's really something that we need to start thinking about, and I don't think we have a choice as South African farmers.
Do we have the capabilities?
Absolutely. We do have the capabilities. There's a few bottlenecks, of course. We're trying to open up borders so that we can make inter-Africa trade a lot more feasible, to really speed it up and make it more competitive. But we definitely have the capabilities. We have some of the best research facilities in the world in South Africa. And I think in terms of looking at yields and how we can up our game, we definitely have it.
The problem is not necessarily on the demand side. It's whether we can supply enough to meet that growing demand, as you mentioned, urbanization, growing incomes, growing populations. The opportunities are there. It's a matter of what do we need in order to overcome the challenges that we have identified in order to meet that growing demand.
After the break, I want to talk about those challenges, about the processes in place, and also your advice to somebody that listened to this program and say, but wait a second, I actually believe that agriculture is something I want to specialize in. I look at the commercial farm, and that is something that excites me. So I want to talk about the challenges, how you overcome them, and what is the avenues to enter the market of primary production. We'll be back right after the break. Welcome back. This is Nation in Conversation. Darby, just before the break, we said that we need to broaden the base. Both of you are involved in the agriculture sector. Your advice for somebody that believes this is a sector they want to be involved in?
I'd really say inform yourself. I think a lot of people are not really aware of the risks in primary agricultural production. I think a lot of people think about the scenery and the countryside, but it's about a lot more than that. And I think the more informed you are, the more you empower yourself with knowledge, the better. And also to go in with a plan. Go in, what do you want to do in primary agriculture? Both Matlo and I are economists in agriculture, but you could be a farmer, you could be in agribusiness. So I think know exactly what you want to do and identify where the gap in the market is for what it is that you want to do.
Let's go for a second back to primary agriculture. The obstacles in terms of broadening the base, what would you say is the major obstacles and how will we overcome them?
Well, some of them are actually structural in nature when you think about South Africa, by and large, is a scarce resource country in terms of land that is suitable for agricultural production. So in order to enhance the productivity of our soils, the technologies, the GMOs that Tabi mentioned, the chemicals and the fertilizers are important to improve the productivity of them. So that is the first obstacle, that if you have land, it's not necessarily readily available to produce maize or oranges. Then the second thing is about the water. We are again a water scarce nation, and I think most of us are aware of that. Now, the irrigation as well as other resources that we can use, or finding a drought-resistant varieties that can grow in wind dry areas like what we have. Then we have other infrastructural issues, that your production may not necessarily be closer to the market where you want to sell. The issues around storage, transportation. So those would be some of the challenges that one would need to overcome. But obviously, you need not be a beginner to deal with those. As a beginner, picking up on a point that Tabi raised, is that you need to have a plan. But you don't have to think about agriculture as working on the farm. You can get a product that has been produced by another farmer, add value to it, and it can be a minor value such as packaging it or changing its form from one raw product to a value-added product and find a market for it. So there are various avenues and opportunities within the sector. So here we're talking about the value chain and not just ending at the farm gate.
Tabi, if we look at 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, how will primary food production change, and what skills or what set of knowledge would a new farmer need to compete in that respect?
Okay, firstly, I think farms will continue to get bigger. Farmers will continue to adopt more technology. They'll continue to be more mechanized and more globally competitive. But I think essentially new farmers really do need to get up to speed with that. And for that to happen, financial markets need to be opened up. We need to think about how we start financing some of these things. Mechanization is not cheap. And for a new farmer to enter into the game, they need some sort of credit. But for that to happen, you need obviously secure tenure. You need to know that you have secure land, and you need to know that you have guaranteed production. So all that needs to be sorted out for new farmers to start to enter the game. And I think that's a very, very key hindrance at the moment.
Part of that is a structural problem that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a lot of people who are farming currently that don't own the land, for instance. And how do you go to a bank and say, hey, I want production credit? And they say, but, what happens when your crop fails? What do we get in return? And a lot of people kind of fall short there. So there is a structural barrier. But another structural barrier that Matlo mentioned is the support. Farming is a very technical exercise. It's not just simply putting a seed in the ground. There's a lot that goes into it. You need to know when to do what. And I think that support needs to increase so that people kind of get more mentorship in terms of how they need to grow their businesses. And I think that will really take us forward.
5, 10, 15 years, Matlo, how do you see the primary food sector?
In order to address some of these challenges, we need to applaud what government has initiated by creating 2 departments that are very important: Small Medium Enterprises Department as well as the Rural Development Department. These 2, if they work well, they need to address precisely the challenges that Tabi has indicated, that if you are a 23-year-old and you want to get into agriculture, do you have the kind of capital that is required for the machinery, for the land, and for marketing? The answer in most cases would be no. So those departments need to come into that space and provide those opportunities, because like you mentioned long term, 5 to 15 years. And that is also in line with the nature of our unemployment. So when you get into farming, first you're creating job for yourself, and if you're successful, you may create jobs for others. And we know how important that job creation is as a national goal. And finally, it's just the point that as a nation, majority of the people are in that young group. So beyond that 15 years, what will the landscape look like in terms of food production if we don't get young farmers getting into the practice? We know that the average age of our farmers is around 65 years. So in 15 years, they would be in their 80s. Now what? They can't be doing the same activities at that age. So we need young farmers to come in right now. And with the right support, given this department and other sources of support, we can actually move to another level in terms of agriculture.
Bobby, from you, are you positive about the future of primary agriculture?
I really am. I'm positive about it, and I think there's a lot of room for innovative entrepreneurs who are in it for the long term and ready to compete globally to start making a home for themselves. I think there's a lot of opportunity.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, we cannot afford to be negative, and we cannot afford to look back and say things are worse. We really need to pick up and address the past challenges, but move forward to greater heights.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you all. You can join the conversation by visiting the website nationinconversation.co.za or follow us on Twitter @NationConverse. Until next week, from me, Theo Foster, goodbye.
Nation in Conversation, proudly brought to you by AFGRI, Fort Knox, Hinterland, Monsanto, Nedbank, NWK, and Sendes.
The world is changing today. The world is changing in every way. Let's stand together, put our hands together, join hands forever. We're making it better. No matter where you are, you could be near or far away. We're singing together, we're dancing together.